Duolingo, I know, uses ませんか to mean would you like to. But isn't ません the negative form? How does this work? ませんか can be translated as would you like to in many situations, but not every situation. So it's not a perfect one-to-one translation. For example, if you are at work because you haven't been fired yet, you can say this to your coworker without any prior conversation. ラーメン食べませんか? You wanna eat some ramen? This means you're inviting your coworker to eat ramen with you because you're totally capable of making friends at work. In this context, you can translate ラーメン食べませんか as would you like to eat ramen with me if that's how you talk to your coworker. But ませんか doesn't always mean would you like to. Let's say your clients are visiting your office and you want to offer them some water. In English, I think you can say, would you like some water? But in Japanese, we wouldn't say お水飲みませんか? Because it sounds more like an invitation to drink water together, which doesn't fit this context. You can technically interpret this as just offering some water, but we typically don't say this. It's not like inviting your clients to go to a hipster matcha cafe to form a performative client-developer relationship like, I'm not like other developers. You're just offering them water as a host. So what can you say in Japanese? You can say something like, お水いかがですか? How would you like some water? How about some water? So, no ませんか here. ませんか conveys very over politeness. Wouldn't you or wouldn't we or whatever. Not true. ませんか isn't overly polite. It can be pretty casual, like you can be close to your coworker, like drinking together, singing karaoke together, going to a club, and blossom into a beautiful wallflowers together. And you can use ませんか with them pretty casually. ラーメン食べませんか? You want to eat some ramen? Pretty casual. Some people try to explain the difference between plain Japanese, like ラーメン食べない? You want to eat some ramen? And ラーメン食べませんか? You want to eat some ramen? Using the difference between do you want to and would you like to in English. But it doesn't fully convey the nuances between ラーメン食べない? You want to eat some ramen? That you might use with your friends, and ラーメン食べませんか? You want to eat some ramen with your coworkers. Because when you speak plain Japanese with your friends, ラーメン食べない? You stick with plain Japanese. You don't suddenly start using this or must just because you want to be polite with your friends, with some exceptions that I discussed in another video. But in English, you can use do you want to and would you like to with the same person depending on the situation. So, ませんか can both mean do you want to or would you like to depending on the situation. Is it interchangeable with ない? He didn't answer the second part, but yes, it is interchangeable with ない. It's not entirely wrong, but it's not 100% interchangeable either. So from ませんか to ない, I think you can always do this to convert ませんか into plain Japanese. So ラーメン食べませんか becomes ラーメン食べない? Do you want to eat ramen? But from ない to ませんか, you can't always do this because we have another negative form, ないです. You can say ラーメン食べないですか? Which can mean are you not going to eat ramen? Are you sure you don't want to eat ramen with us? Which can have different nuances. For example, you're about to leave the office to eat ramen with your coworkers together, but you notice another coworker, Goto-san, is not leaving, not because she's socially awkward, which she totally is, but because she's busy. And you're Kazehaya-kun from Kimi ni Todoke, who wants to include everybody. So you said to Goto-san, ラーメン食べないですか? Are you not gonna eat ramen with us? To make sure you care about her. If you say ラーメン食べませんか to her, it sounds pretty different, as though it's the first time you're inviting her, which isn't the only possible interpretation, but you can see there are differences. But in plain Japanese, we only have ない. We don't have multiple negative forms. Of course, you can add something like no and say ラーメン食べないの, but that's another discussion. And I actually have an interesting episode regarding ないですか? Because I used to have this coworker who would say something like ラーメン食べないですか? To invite me to eat ramen with him, even though in that kind of situation I'd use ませんか and say ラーメン食べませんか? So to me, the way he invited me sounded a little passive in a way that, oh, maybe you don't want to eat ramen with me, but maybe you would. Or like, I wonder if you would want to eat ramen with me, something like that. But maybe to him, it could have been just a normal way of inviting me to eat ramen. So there's a room for interpretation, and this kind of thing can be pretty subjective. If you ask different native speakers, you might get different answers. So this is how I interpret these sentences. And that's why if you want to learn Japanese with me, I'll help you acquire how real-life Japanese people speak Japanese today based on how different native speakers speak Japanese, not just based on how I personally speak Japanese. I actually analyzed transcriptions of natural unscripted conversations between different native speakers. So click on the link in the description and subscribe to my email group. I feel like masenka would be like, wouldn't some ramen be nice? Not really. Masenka is a pretty straightforward expression, so it's not as elaborated as something like, wouldn't some ramen be nice? So with your lonely, girly coworker, ramen tabemasenka can sound as casual as, hey, wanna eat some ramen? We actually have a more formal expression, いかがですか? And you can say, ラーメンいかがですか? Would you like some ramen? And this is not how you speak to your lonely girly coworker. It's a little too formal. I usually translate masenka as why don't we, like why don't we go eat ramen together? So you could use why don't we as a way to explain how a negative form can mean an invitation. But why don't we and masenka can have different nuances. I feel like why don't we can sound more like a soft proposal when you have a prior conversation going on. Like you're talking to your coworkers about what to eat, and you're like, how about sushi? I don't think so. How about pasta? I ate pasta yesterday. And then you can say, hey, why don't we just eat ramen? It's fast, it's quick, and who would want to gain some extra body fat? So with why don't we, there could be some prior conversation. And you can actually use ramen tabemasen ka in this situation. No problem. But if you're just working side by side with your coworker who is playing Candy Crush and you want to invite her, I don't think you would typically say, hey, why don't we eat some ramen? Which you can, but it also sounds like you've been thinking about it internally, or maybe there's some prior conversation, while would you like to sounds more neutral. It's just an invitation. Just like that, you can say, ramen tabemasen ka? Hey, do you want to eat some ramen? Out of the blue, because it's a pretty neutral invitation. My Japanese teacher said masenka was another way of saying masho, let's do thing. That's not true at all. Ramen tabemashou is more like let's eat ramen. You've already decided because people don't always want to make decisions. Masenka is almost exactly like wouldn't you like in English. It's a negative verb form used to express a positive request. Not sure why English speakers have trouble understanding this when it's literally the same. Again, I understand that you can use wouldn't you like as an example of how a negative form can be an invitation, but I'm not convinced that it's almost exactly the same. Let's compare these sentences. Would you like to eat ramen with me? Which I think is closer to ramen tabemasen ka? And wouldn't you like to eat ramen with me? Are these sentences exactly the same? Like, do they have the exact same nuance or do they have different nuances? I feel like wouldn't you implies some type of prior context or some assumptions like, I think you would, or why wouldn't you? Wouldn't you like to be a magical girl? I think you would. It's gonna be great, you can save the world. I actually asked this on X and I got very mixed responses. So I guess this is something we can argue about in the comment section. But this whole conversation actually reminds me of how I learned the English expression, do you want to? It was back in middle school when my English was almost as non-existent as Takopi's hope to return to a happy planet. That's when I came across this expression, do you want to? And I noticed it like, in English you use do you want to invite somebody to do something. Because that's not how we phrase this in Japanese. A literal translation of want to would be tai in Japanese. So want to eat is tabetai. So if you literally translate, do you want to eat ramen? It's gonna be ramen tabetai. But that's not how we typically invite somebody to eat ramen in Japanese. If you say ramen tabetai or ramen tabetai desu ka using desu, it sounds like you're confirming if the other person has the desire to eat ramen. So not necessarily an invitation. You can ask, ramen tabetai, confirm if the other person has the desire, and then you can say, じゃあラーメン食べない to invite them to eat ramen. Which if you directly translate in English can be like, you're not eating ramen? So that's something I noticed in middle school, and I find it interesting how different languages use different structures to use the same ideas. And that's why, if you want to learn Japanese with me, I will teach you how real-life Japanese people today actually speak Japanese in the Japanese way and not the Duolingo way or みんなの日本語 way. So click the link and subscribe to my email group. Japanese with Yuta.